Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we are talking about mega projects and specifically their potential impact, positive and negative, on the communities they serve and the environment they leave behind. While historically the success of a mega project was measured in terms of its delivery to budget or completion to schedule, today these metrics have shifted wider and deeper. As populations grow and the pressure of climate change bites, today's measures of success now focus on the so-called human return on investment, the benefits created to living standards, to carbon reduction, to economic growth, and to environmental improvement. In short, we're no longer just building assets, we're building the social and environmental scaffolding for the 21st century. Well, to discuss this change and its impact on the infrastructure sector, my guest today is Victoria Johnson, Vice President at Consultant HDR and a global infrastructure executive who has spent the last 2 decades redefining the architecture of our cities. I bumped into Victoria during my recent trip to New York, where she chaired a panel at the latest Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit organised by the Infrastructure Policy Advancement team at software giant Bentley Systems. Her panel focused on mega programmes for community and climate, making her ideally placed to tackle this subject today, as does her glittering career, which over the last few decades has spanned advising the Biden-Harris administration on the historic $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure law, to her leadership within the US Conference of Mayors and the African American Mayors Association. So Victoria certainly bridges the gap between high-level policy and street-level impact with recent mega project work, including transformation of JFK, LaGuardia and Newark airports in New York, to the recent strategic planning of Olympic legacies in Milan and Los Angeles. Let's get stuck in. Victoria, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast today.
Hello, Anthony. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
That's a real pleasure. It's great to catch up with you again in New York. And as I mentioned, you just chaired a fantastic and fascinating panel at the TIP Summit this week on lessons from the Milan Cortina Games, plans for the 2026 FIFA World Cup venues in the US, and the forthcoming 2028 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. My intro, I suggested that the sector maybe needs to adjust the way it measures mega program return on investment. I mean, how do you describe that particular change and that challenge?
Yes, well, that challenge is really threefold. As you shared, historically, we have measured the success of these programs through our view of hard infrastructure, the nuts and bolts of the roads, of the stadiums, essentially, that we stand up.
Mm-hmm. Which is all important.
Which is very important. Yeah. Certainly don't want to diminish, of course, the safety, right, and the sound technical excellence we still need to continue to steward. Mm-hmm. But now we're really trying to create broader outcomes and approaching this work through social, economic and environmental approaches, to where, in addition to, of course, the hard infrastructure, how are we also considering the communities that we're impacting, and what are we leaving behind in terms of legacy?
Yeah. So taking those mega project examples that I mentioned in Milan and in the US, what then for you are the lessons when it comes to building that community environmental legacy?
Sure. The lessons are certainly diverse. I'll highlight a few. And so one, typically, as a variety of stakeholders come together to make something like Milan Cortina happen, of course, the upcoming World Cup, as well as LA 2028, typically those are governmental agencies, be they municipal, state, federal, with, of course, other critical stakeholders. Oftentimes, historically, communities, essentially the target zip codes and neighborhoods, right, that are impacted by these programs, typically are not involved in the early stages. They're essentially informed, if you will, once the cake.
It happens to them.
It happens to them and not in collaboration with them. Mm-hmm. So a key approach, which across the board, both the public sector and private sector, we're trying to do better about, is co-creating these programs and these approaches in partnership with the community, allowing them and inviting them, I should say, to have a seat at the table, and co-creating and co-designing solutions that center them, and also, of course, address the immediate needs, but also some longer term needs in terms of environmental impacts, opportunities for jobs, as well as exposure to young people to essentially develop communities where everyone can thrive.
Yeah, I mean, it's all absolutely vital stuff. But I suppose someone might also suggest that we spend too much time thinking perhaps about these wider peripheral issues and not enough time focused on the key economic growth outcomes when it comes to these major investments. How does it drive the nations forward? How does it drive the economies forward and drive jobs? I mean, how do you characterize the balance that you need to strike between that raw economic success and the needs of the communities and the environment?
Sure. Well, I would actually propose that these approaches directly impact the economic development and growth that we're talking about. For example, as you're coming into a community and spending millions or billions of dollars, if you take the time to essentially invite, train your local residents to contribute to the development and the building of these stadiums, the roads, et cetera, the transit systems that need to operate to pull this off, you are investing in the economic growth of that given neighborhood or city. And so as we essentially have looked at this essentially through one lens, if you really broaden this, these social and economic drivers, it also empowers the local residents to have more access to income and revenue to help grow the economic engine of a given city.
Really, really powerful stuff and a lot in it. And I know that you, as I explained, you're a VP with HDR and you're planning a white paper with Bentley and with Milan's Bocconi University, looking at LA, Milan, and the forthcoming Brisbane Olympics, I believe. Also, tell me about that paper. What are you going to try and achieve there? And why is the traditional model of mega events, no longer perhaps viable in today's financial environment?
Absolutely. Well, as you shared, we are very excited about our new white paper that is being led by Bentley Systems and Bocconi University in partnership, of course, with us here at HDR, where we want to essentially do some peer exchange and sharing of best practices, which centers in three areas. Feasibility. So as we talk about these major programs, how are we essentially addressing feasibility, also integrating some of the digital platforms, tools, AI to, of course, increase efficiency as well as cost. Also looking at sustainability. So how are we addressing some of the resilience needs in terms of how are we positioning communities to essentially thrive and deal with some of the climate issues, as well as leaving intangible, lasting legacy. So how through these programs, to your point, Milan, we have LA coming up. You mentioned Brisbane. How can we also really broaden the traditional approach that, again, only focuses on hard infrastructure and oftentimes has left behind stadiums and buildings and structures that become vacant and that are no longer viable in a community? How do we maximize and reuse those structures? And how do we also lean into the sustainability and legacy that we can do more of? Because
there's that balance between, if you build temporary stadiums, then that's often a waste of money because you got to take them down and you just don't get the value from it. If you build new and they're not used in the future, then again you're wasting money. So it's a real careful balance you're trying to achieve there.
Absolutely. And in the white paper, we will talk about how we approach that. Again, really building upon some of the thought leadership of course, my colleague Veronica at Bocconi University, the fantastic work Bentley is doing in the technology AI space. And as at HDR, as we continue to support our clients, how are we helping them in large programs and capital planning deliver broad outcomes through our work?
And you've got a lot of stuff going on in your doorstep. You're American, obviously. You grew up in Orange County, California. You live in Atlanta, and with the Atlanta hosting 8 matches, I believe, in the 2026 FIFA World Cup. And of course, we've got the LA 2028 Olympics on the horizon. I believe also hosting the Super Bowl next year. So there's a lot going on there. And we heard a lot about that at the TIP conference. I mean, what specific governance issues and lessons are we learning from these, the recent Milan Cortina 26, for instance, about delivery and outcome?
Sure. Fantastic question. In our panel that you started off with, where my colleague Veronica Vecchi from Bocconi University, who also, of course, served in a leadership role at Milan Cortina, talked a lot about how in Milan, the Olympics were hosted in a variety of different cities, mid-size, small size, and large cities across Italy. And some of the opportunities that presented, but as well as challenges. And with that, of course, you had a variety of stakeholders. And so as we think think about FIFA World Cup here in the States, as we think about LA 2028, and to your point, the 2027 Super Bowl, how are we working across federal, state, local partners, as well as, of course, for example, the city of Los Angeles. We also had Stephanie Wiggins, who's the CEO of LA Metro, who has been tasked, of course, with managing all of the transit.
Yeah, making it a transit first games, isn't it? Which
Exactly.
in LA, being so car dominated, it's just mind boggling, really.
It is, yes.
You can't get to the big games by car.
That's right.
In LA, that's a big thing.
Yes, as a California girl, we are just so accustomed to getting in our cars and driving where we need to go. We certainly need to increase and leverage our transit systems. And Stephanie, during our panel, talked a lot about the fantastic work that she and her team at LA Metro are doing to, of course, be transit forward for the upcoming both Olympics and the World Cup. And so in terms of outcomes and what we were able to learn from some of the information from Milan is, how do we start to plan earlier in the process and bring these stakeholders to bear together earlier in the planning process, as opposed to perhaps having a smaller set of stakeholders really kind of set the governance and then invite the broader stakeholders who are responsible for
make people feel they're
implementation.
part of it right from the very start. And in Milan, Cortina, what amazed me was there was an awful lot of communities that were really taking a leadership role there. It was spread over such a wide area. Veronica talked about the need to bring in a vast number of communities, and I imagine it's the same in Atlanta, when you've got all these different venues, and the same in Los Angeles. Trying to bring all these disparate people together from the start, that's a big challenge.
Absolutely. Doing it from the start. And that will also help set the path and inform the type of community benefits we've talked about and outcomes. Once the cake is fully baked, it's more difficult to essentially kind of get the outcomes you're looking for. And also both in Atlanta as well as Los Angeles, how are we also going about, as Veronica talked about, I think she said there were 52 nationalities they were able to engage in some workforce development opportunities, procurement opportunities with local contractors and small businesses. So both Atlanta and Los Angeles are certainly carrying those lessons forward.
And I know in the white paper you plan to explore the concept of building in sustainability and legacy, from that planning stage, but also through to the operational stage. I mean, you talk about the need to leverage the investment and the commitment of major projects or mega projects to achieve greater outcomes. I mean, how can a city of Atlanta or Los Angeles, use that single event to underpin that wider infrastructure master plan? Because while you're focusing on building stadiums, you're focusing on building the infrastructure that's required for those games. How do you make sure that it actually delivers that wider long-term infrastructure plan for the city?
Sure. I'll highlight 3 examples. So one, again, early engagement of multiple stakeholders across a variety of sectors is critical, because you have to have different perspectives at the table early in the process to build this into the planning. That's one. 2, in terms of workforce development and upskilling, fantastic opportunity to upskill your local community with a variety of different skills and talents, not only to benefit the program, but also to benefit the broader needs and longer term needs of a city. I mean, think about the FIFA World Cup. Think about the wealth of different skill sets and trades that you need to deliver that. And so if you can empower and provide the training necessary for your local residents to contribute to that, they can take those skills into other jobs and other careers right there in the community. So it really increases the talent pool locally. It builds the brain trust. And it also helps address some of the issues around the silver tsunami, as well as the retirees that we see coming and that knowledge transfer. It also helps us ensure that, as again, from a small business perspective, fantastic opportunity to help small businesses grow, not only in terms of building their capacity through this program, but once the program is complete, they have now grown in size, they can hire more people locally. And so it really continues to drive the economic needs of a given community.
Let's talk a bit about you, Victoria, because I must say you're CV is hugely impressive. You're a VP at consultant HDR based in Atlanta, Georgia, where you lead an advisory practice, but you're all over the world, all over the US most of the time. You describe yourself as and I quote, a global thought leader and speaker, providing infrastructure and economic development perspectives on global imperatives, including social value, environmental, social governance, sustainability, and resilience. So that's a lot. Tell us about your work at HDR. What do you actually do?
Sure. And so we are certainly committed at HDR to working with our clients, federal, state, local, to support delivery of programs that solve their greatest challenges, but leave the community better off. Yeah. And so through, of course, our architecture, design, engineering, we also provide a wide array of advisory services that also support the strategic priorities of essentially your municipal leaders, your mayors, your governors, federal government, in terms of how through those strategic priorities, how are we also operationalizing that through the projects and the programs that we ultimately deliver.
Yeah, that's globally.
Yes, we are 15,000 globally, based in Omaha, Nebraska. And so through the work of the practice that I lead in conjunction with my colleagues, working to operationalize those strategic priorities that our clients set, our client leaders set, in conjunction with the projects and the programs that we deliver. So as we talked about, as we're coming in essentially to deliver a project beyond the infrastructure itself, how are we also delivering and centering those social, economic, and environmental needs to ensure that we're not just talking about it conceptually, but we're able to really build that into our approach, build that into our plan. And ultimately, when a master plan or a program or a project is delivered, we're able to help our clients really operationalize those strategic, sometimes abstract objectives into something tangible that you can actually feel and see.
And getting it in early in the project. So
exactly.
That it achieves that value. Before joining HDR last year, you spent 7 years at Jacobs, and you posted a very impressive CV, seats on a huge range of boards, advisory panels covering water, transportation and aviation sectors, energy, communities and diversity initiatives. But you started life in communications and public relations. What got you into infrastructure then?
So I have actually been in infrastructure since undergrad. And so I went to Purdue University. I'm a proud boilermaker, boiler up. And so as everyone knows or should know, Purdue is one of the best and top engineering schools in the world. No, it's in Indiana.
Sorry.
No problem. West Lafayette, Indiana, go Boilers. And so I have ultimately been in the architecture engineering space since undergraduate. As you know, it takes a variety of disciplines to essentially deliver the fantastic work that engineering firms deliver. And so since undergrad, I was immersed in engineering and civil, mechanical, electrical engineering, of course, as a liberal arts student. And once I graduated from Purdue and relocated back to Southern California, was recruited by a construction management firm and worked a lot with Caltrans, with LA Metro, OCTA, worked some on the Tom Bradley International Terminal. And that really allowed me to really start to cut my teeth, if you will, in terms of infrastructure and the wealth of opportunities and needs in terms of different professions and disciplines to make everything happen.
One of the eye-catching things on your CV, Victoria, is it you are an expert advisor to the White House and to Congress at the moment, and you recently advised the Biden-Harris administration on the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure law, which was designed to transform the US's approach to sustainable infrastructure investment, pretty much in the way we've been discussing here, which is maybe you got to actually embed this into government policy. I mean, what did it achieve, or did it achieve what you hoped it would achieve?
Yes, this was a fantastic opportunity to serve as an expert advisor with a handful of my colleagues across different disciplines and sectors to advise the previous administration under President Biden and Harris to essentially move this historic investment in infrastructure. We talked a lot about, of course, our infrastructure report card at our recent TIP Summit.
This is the ASCE's report card,
Yes, the American Society of Civil Engineers, of course, has an annual a report card, and the U.S., we're certainly getting there. And so through that, acknowledging the tremendous need that infrastructure needed in terms of investment. So very proud of being able to transition the previous Build Back Better into the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2001. So proud of that work in conjunction with, again, my colleagues in this space with the National Skills Coalition, who stood up this infrastructure advisory panel. And so through this work, which is nearly sunsetting now in 2026, very proud of us, one, being able to, as we just talked about, integrate not only the hard infrastructure, but the social, economic, and environmental needs, benefits, and burdens into IIJA, workforce development, centering communities, both urban and rural. So very proud of being able to really integrate that. Certainly more to do, but very proud of being able to, one, get that on the table, if you will, and get them some support at the local level to deliver.
Well, looking forward, of course, times and the administration in the US have changed, but you've also worked in many worked with many administrations internationally on a range of different in a range of different governance settings. I mean, without getting too political, what are the common themes or approaches that can deliver better outcomes?
Yes, so many common themes around, of course, infrastructure delivery, funding challenges, the need for a skilled workforce, positioning the younger generation to essentially experience a knowledge transfer to, of course, continue the work, and the important need of working with local communities and local community-based organizations in order to access the communities who are in the greatest need. And so through those common themes around infrastructure delivery, whether you're in the UK, you're in the US, you're in South America, so much commonality around very common challenges. And I think, as we talked about during our panel, how can we increase not only best practices sharing, but as we talked about, really even dropping the layer a bit tactically to really talk through, which I know we will in our white paper, how can we really glean the lessons learned in terms of how a given agency, a given municipality, a given program can start to adopt some very focused and tactical approaches to essentially connect the dots between social, economic, environmental needs and outcomes, and through our capital planning process, looking at some approaches in terms of adding criteria that center some of the social economic indicators, a financial capability analysis, as well as some efforts to essentially, again, invite some non-traditional stakeholders to the table. I see those common themes, and I see an opportunity to lean in more in terms of how we implement approaches that help connect the gaps.
I mean, we hear a lot about the federal government in the US, but of course, I think about 87%, I think there's a stat that I saw, of US infrastructure spend is controlled locally. You also serve on the United States Conference of Mayors, the Mayors Business Council for the African Americans Mayors Association. So real focus in your world about that local delivery. I mean, tell us about that. How do city mayors and local leaders approach that social and economic and environmental need of communities?
Fantastic question. So very proud of the work that we are privileged to do with both the U.S. Conference of Mayors as well as the African American Mayors Association, which is a fantastic representation of municipal leaders across the U.S., both large cities, mid-size, and small. And they are certainly very committed to what we like to call multi-benefit and comprehensive whole of government approaches to addressing the social, economic, and environmental needs of their communities. I'll highlight three in particular. Very focused. We have mayors very focused on affordability and ensuring that everyone essentially in their communities can make sure they can pay their bills, afford proper medical care and the like. Also addressing the needs around infrastructure. We understand the increase of climate events. Also also, of course, needs around water, clean water, having access to affordable water, as well as access to affordable and safe transit. And also engage very much so with developers to ensure that as we address affordability and increase access to housing, we do so in ways that does not displace people, and also, of course, provides an opportunity for people to stay in their community. So very proud of the work that our mayors are doing in this space and how they're being very intentional and very thoughtful about how they ensure that every member of their community can thrive, and putting in approaches that ensure that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the pressures on local government in the US as they are in the UK, very real. There's not a lot of money around. Very interesting that we heard at the TIP conference from Nashville, where they had a referendum on whether to charge the local residents a specific tax in order to invest in their infrastructure. I suppose that is something which I imagine locally you have to consider increasingly. And I refer to that because your background is in communication. To what extent is that foundation in storytelling and human connection? How does that influence your approach to engineering and infrastructure advisory?
It has been a fantastic foundation for me in terms of connecting people to infrastructure. And as we think about our water systems, our roads, our bridges, our airports, at the end of the day, these are all there to service people.
Yeah.
And so as we think about, again, how we continue to provide engineering excellence, innovation, how we move the needle in terms of technology and AI, how do we do so in a way that continues to center people, to tell their stories, and to acknowledge both the burdens and benefits that infrastructure has on communities, and how do we do so in a way that removes barriers, creates more access, and also continues to really drive the needle on what's possible.
Yeah.
And so that human connection, of course, as we continue to lean into inviting more young people to be both in the STEAM and the STEM and the sciences, as well as, again, helping other students understand the broad array of careers and interdisciplinary talents that we need in order to make an engineering firm work, helping them understand that human touch, helping them understand that it takes all of us, and continuing to connect the needle in terms on how we deliver these in ways that serve people.
Yeah. Which is what I found it fascinating. Your work through the US Conference of Mayors, you must have seen a wide range of different leadership styles there as they all bring in that local community engagement. I mean, what defines in the US, what defines an innovative city leader in 2026 when it comes to infrastructure and particularly investment to serve that community in the way you describe it?
Absolutely. And so through our work with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, certainly privileged to work with a variety of mayors coast to coast from a variety of different backgrounds. Would love to highlight City of Atlanta, Mayor Andre Dickens, who is a chemical engineer, Georgia Tech graduate, but also, of course, a city servant who is originally from Atlanta and very much committed to seeing everyone in Atlanta thrive. So fantastic example of a municipal leader with vision, a deep understanding of infrastructure, and what it really takes in order to, of course, deal with the hard nuts and bolts of the infrastructure, but also deal with, of course, the variety of residents in his community, veterans, young people, young professionals, a variety of implants from other cities. And so one example, and certainly many others, in terms of how municipal leaders are really approaching city leadership through a whole of government approach and ensuring that as they're looking to move their cities forward, invest in development, also doing so in ways that center communities, center small businesses, center young people, and do so in ways that does not displace and addresses some of the challenges and barriers that they face.
Well, I understand that Mayor Dickens in Atlanta also chairs a P3, Public-Private Partnerships Task Force with the US Conference of Mayors. I mean, PPPs or P3s are often discussed as a key to driving that investment. They're typically hard to execute, though. In the UK, they are anyway, but I imagine they are also typically hard to execute in the US. I mean, tell us more about the work that Mayor Dickens is doing, and how is he leveraging that work to make these partnerships work for communities in the run-up to hosting, say, the football or the soccer World Cup this summer?
Absolutely. So Mayor Dickens, as you shared, serves as the chair of a public-private partnerships task force via the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And through that, he is working with fellow mayors from coast to coast to essentially talk about the role that the private sector plays in helping cities essentially invest and fund in some very much needed infrastructure projects, and really looking at, particularly as we address needs around affordability, helping cities offset some of the funding challenges. And so through that work, tons of best practices sharing across both the public and private sector under his leadership. And then also, of course, acknowledging the way that cities essentially adopt P3s are certainly varied. And also, as Mayor Dickens and the city prepares for the FIFA World Cup to come to Atlanta, leveraging that engagement in terms of working with private sector partners in new ways and ensuring that as we're working essentially with the city and engaging private partners, how are we doing so in ways that continues to center affordability, young people engaging and getting some exposure there, increased investment in communities that have suffered some chronic disinvestment, and then also ensuring that through the work, of course, with private sector firms, they're able to help Atlanta essentially move Atlanta forward.
Meanwhile, though, in Los Angeles, where they're planning the first privately financed Olympic Games, I believe, completely privately financed Olympic Games since Atlanta 86. Mayor Karen Bass there, she's, I imagine, facing a dual challenge of planning those Olympic Games while battling with the ongoing local transit and social needs. I mean, how is she successfully delivering more with less during this period of high expectation?
Yes, Mayor Karen Bass is certainly a trailblazer in her own right, in her engagement in both the U.S. Conference of Mayors. She also serves in leadership with the African American Mayors Association. And so in her work, as we just talked about in preparing for the 2028 Olympic Games, Stephanie Wiggins, who of course serves as the CEO of LA Metro, as she talked about in our panel, really talked about they're tackling this through being very focused on people-centered transit and how they're going about ensuring that as they prepare for the Olympic Games, they can do so in ways that address, to your point, the fact that Southern California is very vast, right?
And we're all over very car-filled.
Yes, very car-filled. And also in ways that address, again, some of the traffic, some of the congestion, of course, folks flying into LAX and the others. And so through some of the airport engagement, of course, the work that Stephanie shared going on at LA Metro, Mayor Bass and her broader team are certainly approaching this in a way that is going to drive social, economic, environmental engagement, working with local small businesses, providing some community benefits opportunities, as well as ensuring increased access to transit as they continue to expand and grow their system.
I know you're also working in Memphis with Mayor Young, where there's a focus on affordable housing as a core infrastructure need. And when the TIP Summit visited Toronto last year, we talked a lot about housing-led infrastructure and breaking down those investment silos. How can we better integrate housing into the broader transportation and water programs? I mean, what's Mayor Young up to there?
So Mayor Young, again, is another fantastic municipal leader, of course, there in the city of Memphis. And he's another leader, of course, with a fantastic background, also another engineer. He served as the director of housing previously before becoming mayor. So he's another leader that certainly has a very comprehensive view to his leadership. And so as he continues to lean into affordable housing and working with necessary stakeholders to essentially increase access to affordable housing, doing so in ways that centers the dignity, of course, of local residents, and also doing so in ways that invites people in, working with young people, ensuring that they have some opportunities there for workforce development, some exposure. Also, to your point, in terms of offsetting, of course, beyond transportation and water programs, how are they also working in terms of crime reduction, something that he's also been very focused on and adamant about in terms of crime reduction. So as we think about affordable housing and increasing access to dignified, affordable housing, also doing so in ways that dignify and center communities, address, of course, development and engagement of youth, and also just ensuring that he's meeting the needs of broader Memphians.
Sounds scarily like systemic thinking and an approach that covers more of the holistic needs of the community there. But what amazes me in the US is how many really small democracies there are which are driving infrastructure. There's lots and lots and lots of mayors, lots and lots of small democracies, and I imagine it's a huge challenge to make sure they are all working together and they're all on the same page.
Absolutely. And through the work, of course, of, again, the African American Mayors Association, U.S. Conference of Mayors, there is ongoing peer exchange, there's ongoing thought leadership, and having the opportunity to serve on the Business Council certainly, again, reinforces the role that private sector firms play in helping them realize that vision.
Yeah. Let's talk quickly about some of the key areas that you're involved with, specific infrastructure sectors, and their approach to community benefit. You've been working in the aviation sector, particularly for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, on the modernization of JFK, LaGuardia, and New York airports in New York. I think it's a $25 billion redevelopment program going on there, which is huge. I mean, they're massive undertakings. How do these airports ensure that the economic benefits of construction actually reach the locals of Queens and New York boroughs?
Fantastic question. And so the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has been a model agency of really institutionalizing approaches that center communities. And so as they're in the heart of Queens, respectively across JFK and LaGuardia, in the heart, of course, Newark, how are they doing so in ways that really address and benefit the local residents of those respective areas? And so under the leadership of recently retired Executive Director of the Port Authority, Rick Cotton, in conjunction with several other team leaders there, Hirsch Parekh, and so many others, this was a fantastic example of how we essentially approach a very large program in ways that center opportunities for local-owned businesses, for workforce development. We stood up an Office of Second Chance that also centered opportunities for second chance citizens and individuals touched by the criminal justice system. Certainly also want to highlight, of course, the Port Authority and their commitment to community. And they've stood up respectively across all three airports, community centers embedded in the community that really serve as direct access to understand the jobs, the opportunities, the contracting opportunities available. Would also, of course, would be remiss. I would also certainly want to mention Sylvina Brooks Powers, who's a councilwoman with New York City Council in Queens, also Deputy Speaker of the New York City Council, Natasha Williams, both of Queens, and then also recently elected City Councilwoman Chanel Thomas, who I had the privilege of working with on this redevelopment in conjunction with so many other colleagues and team partners, where we were able to accomplish so much, particularly at LaGuardia, where we were able to have over about $850 million spent with local Queens-based owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. We were able to help hire over 1,000 individuals in the community through some demand-led hiring and forecasting. And so we are continuing those approaches currently on JFK as LaGuardia is complete. And so fantastic example of how through all of the engineering, the planning, the design that it takes essentially to deliver a development of this size, certainly very intentional work through the Port Authority and the work that we do as a consultant in partnership with them in the full ecosystem of ensuring economic community benefits through this development.
And meanwhile, though, another big sector you're working in is water. Let's talk water. I mean, it was a revelation to me at the last Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit in New York to hear the perilous state that the US finds itself in when it comes to water supply. And I think there's 50,000 plus water authorities battling to supply the 350 million population. In your recent article for Harvard, you discussed the concept of fair and equitable utilities. What is that concept then? And how can water utilities, big and small, use data perhaps to identify and rectify service inequities underserved in underserved neighborhoods?
So In our article with Harvard, where we talked about fair and equitable utilities, really highlighted the work of utilities like New York City Department of Protection, Louisville Metropolitan Sewer District, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, who are continuing to serve as anchor institutions to address the variety of needs of their ratepayers. And data plays a very significant role in this. For example, in New York City, we are currently supporting their long-term control plan and what we call a use attainability analysis. And through that work, the data collection process helps us identify, again, not only the environmental impacts of water quality or main breaks or flooding or basement backups, it also helps us understand some of the social and economic needs around maybe variances in income levels, variances in terms of your income and ability to pay your water bill and other household expenses. And so data is critical to help utilities, one, understand what the actual needs are, and then from that data, use data-informed approaches to essentially put forward solutions to help utilities really grapple with and identify where can they do the most good and what is most feasible and what is most viable in terms of addressing those needs.
Well, that's a good point just to draw some conclusions, because some of the issues, or the issues we talked about challenges around driving mega projects, whether they're transportation or aviation or water. And certainly London 2012 Olympics was a project which we've taken huge learnings from globally in terms of building in legacy from a major sporting event like that. What would you say then is the most important global lesson we can learn to ensure that future host cities, like maybe Salt Lake City in 2034 or even Los Angeles coming up for 2028, what can we learn from that kind of project?
Absolutely. We have gleaned some fantastic lessons learned from the 2012 London Olympics, such as demand-led hiring and demand-led workforce development that they were very keen on in terms of looking at the target zip codes in London where the games were taking place and looking at opportunities to engage local residents and some of the training opportunities, the skilled trades, in addition to hiring local businesses to help deliver the games. And so London 2012 Olympics provided a great example that we've been able to deploy on JFK, LaGuardia, Newark, as we just talked about. As to your point, we're also thinking about approaches in Atlanta for the World Cup and the Olympic Games coming up in Los Angeles and going forward. And so fantastic example of how very early on, instead of just taking a traditional approach, they were very proactive and innovative at the time of looking at social, economic, and environmental approaches in ways that brought in local residents who typically see all of this development going on that they're not necessarily engaged in, and also in ways that help really increase the economic engine and talent pipeline of a given community.
So we got all these lessons. We know how to do all this. So finally, what happens next? How can the global infrastructure sector, Victoria, how do we move towards creating those measurable long-term climate and community resilience that we're seeking?
Sure. I will leave us with three key examples. So one, we have more work to do as we talked about planning and being more intentional, and this is likely governance, about ensuring that we engage the right stakeholders, a broad array of stakeholders early in the planning process, because we can talk about all of these wonderful benefits as often as we'd like, but if we do not build it into our planning process to ensure that a variety of partners are at the table early, once budgets are set, once schedules are set, it's much more difficult to essentially integrate and deliver this work in the longer term. So one, broader engagement of stakeholders early in the planning process. Second, I will say leveraging, as we talked about through our industry engagement with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, African American Mayors Association, and really looking at, as we talk about mayors and their strategic municipal priorities, how do we operationalize that through, of course, the different departments, Department of Transportation, Department of Water, Department of Public Works, and integrate those strategic approaches through the capital planning and project delivery process. That is where we have to narrow that gap in terms of strategic into essentially operationalizing that with the engineering teams that actually deliver these programs? And how do we leverage where we've gotten this right and continue to scale and replicate those best practices essentially for better delivery? And then lastly, how do we continue, which I think we're doing a great job at via our exchange here, how do we continue to broaden the ecosystem of stakeholders that we work with in this space? Of course, public and private sector have always worked together, but we're also looking at ways where we work together in new ways, as we've just talked about, but also bringing in community-based organizations. We talked about, of course, helping build the capacity of small businesses. Also, we've had academia, right, serve as a great research and development partner, Bocconi University. We talked about Harvard. We had Cornell with us there at the TIP Summit. And so how do we continue to broaden the suite, if you will, of stakeholders that we engage to really help us not only grow what's working, but also move into the next kind of horizon of what's possible?
Victoria, you make it all sound so simple, so easy to deliver. And no, thanks so much for sharing 3 great points to leave us on. I really enjoyed your session at the TIP conference, and it's been great to catch up and really expand on those really big ideas on the podcast today. Really interesting, really important stuff in the US, but also around the whole world, I think. So thanks so much for joining me on the Infrastructure Podcast today and for sharing your thinking.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you for the time to be here, and we are certainly looking forward to what's next.
Great. Well, what's next, of course, is the FIFA World Cup, and I look forward to seeing how you're getting on with that. And then, of course, as you said, the Super Bowl in 27, and then the Olympics in 28. So lots and lots of planning to do there, and I'm now going to go and sample your work at the JFK airport as I fly back to the UK. So sadly, that's all we've got time for on the podcast now, but there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector in the UK, in the US, around the world. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Victoria, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.